There's a decision being made about you right now by people who haven't spoken to you yet. It has nothing to do with what you say. And by the end of this film, that decision is going to start going your way in every room you walk into. Quote, a person lies still inside a scanner. On a screen above them, faces appear, one after another, each one ranked. This one sits above them, this one sits below. And the instant a higher ranked face shows up, a specific part of that person's brain lights up. Before they've decided anything, before they've even noticed they're looking. You've done this too. You did it today, to everyone you passed. And it's been done to you. You've walked into a room and left it certain you'd been filed beneath somebody, certain that person was just born with something you weren't. They weren't. They handed an old machine, the one signal it promotes, and you handed it the opposite. We start with the machine that already made up its mind about you. Picture a negotiation table, 10 minutes before anyone said anything that matters. 6 people, a deal on the table. The kind of room where a company's next year gets decided. And before the first real sentence lands, everyone in that room already knows something. They know who's actually running it. Not the person whose name is on the door. Not necessarily the one talking the most. You feel it the way you feel a change in air pressure. And you feel it fast. Faster than the small talk even finishes. Here's what's strange about that. Nobody in the room could tell you how they know. They'd say it's a vibe, a read, an instinct they've built over years of watching people. That's the story we tell ourselves. And it's wrong in a specific way. It's not intuition. It's not a soft skill you picked up from experience. It's a system, a dedicated one, running separately from the part of your brain that's processing the actual words being said. While you're listening to someone explain the quarterly numbers, a completely different piece of hardware is already filing that person into a slot, above you, below you. It doesn't wait for the explanation to finish. Now hold on, because here's the part that should bother you. You've spent your whole life assuming the verdict on you gets written by what you say. You rehearse the pitch, you sharpen the argument, you pick the right words for the room, and the verdict is already in before your mouth opens. That's not a metaphor. That's the claim this entire film is going to prove, piece by piece, with the actual research behind it. Because this isn't a theory about presence or energy. It's a mechanism. It has a location in the brain. It runs on chemistry you can name, and it obeys one signal, consistently, across every room you'll ever walk into. I'm not going to tell you what that signal is yet. You already know the feeling I mean, though. You've watched someone stay level while everyone else in the room got loud, and you've watched the room quietly hand that person the top spot, without a vote. That's the one signal it obeys. Hold on to that phrase, because we're going to spend the next several minutes proving it's real, and then the rest of the film showing you exactly how to become the person it's obeying. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about that boardroom. The room isn't reading confidence, it isn't reading intelligence, and it isn't reading who has the best numbers. It's running a much older, much colder calculation, and that calculation has a name, and it lives in a lab, and it's been sitting in a scanner since 2008. 2008. Neuron, the journal. A team out of the National Institute of Mental Health, led by a researcher named Zink, runs an experiment with a simple setup and a title that doesn't hide what it's after. They call the paper, Know Your Place. Here's what they did. They put people in a scanner and showed them faces, each one tagged with a rank in a made-up hierarchy, above the viewer or below them. Nothing complicated, just a face and a status. And they watched what the brain did with that information. When a higher-ranked face showed up, specific regions lit up. Not the language areas, not anything to do with reasoning through the person's credentials. The activity showed up in the visual and attention circuitry toward the back and top of the brain, in a reward structure called the ventral striatum, and in a piece of the prefrontal cortex tied to tracking value. In plain terms, the brain treated a higher-ranked face the way it treats something worth paying attention to. Automatically, before any decision got made about what to do with that attention. Now, here's the detail that matters more. When the hierarchy was unstable, when rank could actually change, when the person in the scanner didn't know if that face above them might drop below them, something else switched on. The amygdala, lit up. So did the medial prefrontal cortex. That's the part of the brain built for threat detection, paired with a region involved in thinking about other people's intentions. The moment rank became uncertain, the brain stopped, just registering the hierarchy, and started actively working the problem. Sit with that for a second, because it means something specific. Your brain isn't casually aware of who outranks you. It's got dedicated equipment built to track it, and that equipment gets more active, not less, exactly when the ranking is up for grabs. This is the boardroom from a minute ago, mapped onto real tissue. Every person at that table has this hardware running, clocking who's above and who's below, and running harder the second it looks like the order might shift. Clock, 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 clock. Now, hold on, before you take this further than it goes. This study shows you where rank gets processed. It shows you that the brain has a dedicated address for this information, separate from language, separate from reasoning. It does not show you what wins the rank. It doesn't tell you what makes the brain file one person above another. That's a different question, and it's the one this whole film is built around. But you can't answer that question yet, because there's a piece missing. If the brain has hardware that tracks rank, does it also do something with that information? Does it compute it? Because tracking a fact and running a calculation are two different jobs, and the next study says your brain is doing both. Try something. Look at two numbers, 7 and 2, and tell me which is bigger. You didn't calculate that. You didn't count up from 1. Something in your brain just placed them on a line and read off the answer, instantly, before you could even call it thinking. Now, here's the claim. Your brain reads rank the same way. Northwestern, 2009, Neuropsychologia. A researcher named Chiao ran a study looking at what happens in the brain when people judge someone's status, not their trustworthiness, not their competence, just where they sit, higher or lower, on a social scale. And the region that lit up for that judgment was the inferior parietal cortex, specifically machinery inside the intraparietal sulcus. Here's why that detail matters more than it sounds like it should. That exact patch of cortex is the same territory the brain uses to compare quantities, length, size, amount. It's the region that fires when you glance at two piles of coins and know which one's bigger without counting either pile. And according to Chiao's findings, judging status magnitude recruits that same machinery, which means rank isn't processed like an opinion, it's processed like a measurement. Go back to what you already know from the last section. Zink showed you the brain has dedicated hardware that tracks who outranks who, and that the hardware works harder when the order is unstable. Chiao adds the missing half. That hardware isn't just noticing rank exists. It's placing people on a line, the same way it would place two numbers. And it's doing that placement with quantity comparison circuitry, not judgment circuitry, not language circuitry. That's the part that should sit with you for a second. You don't feel like you're doing math when you walk into a room and clock who's in charge. It feels like an impression, something soft, something intuitive. But if this research is right, what's actually happening underneath that impression is closer to arithmetic than to opinion. Fast, automatic, comparative, higher than this one, lower than that one. Not, I think this person seems important, a position, computed. Now go back to the boardroom from section 1. 6 people, 10 minutes before anyone said anything real. What this study tells you is that the room didn't just feel out a hierarchy in some vague, human way. Every brain at that table ran a comparison, fast, on every other person in it. The same kind of comparison it would run on two piles of coins. By the time the first real sentence got spoken, the math was already done. The room had a ranking. It just hadn't announced it yet. Here's what that leaves open, though. A number line only tells you where something sits, relative to everything else. It doesn't tell you what earns a high position in the first place. Rank has to be 1 on some axis, some quality. The brain is actually scoring when it looks at a stranger's face and decides where to place them on that line. And it turns out the brain isn't scoring on one thing, it's scoring on exactly 2. You meet someone new, a handshake maybe, or just a look across a room before anyone's introduced. And in that gap, before either of you has said a real sentence, you've already formed something, not a full opinion. Something faster and cruder than that, a read. You'd call it a first impression if someone asked. But the research says your brain isn't forming one impression. It's running two separate scores at the same time on two different questions, and neither of those questions is, do I like this person? Princeton, 2008, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Researchers Oosterhoff and Todorov ran people through a series of face judgments and mapped what the brain was actually doing when it sized up a stranger. What they found was that snap judgments of neutral, unfamiliar faces collapsed down to two dimensions, just two. Everything else people report feeling about a face, smart, friendly, shifty, tired, gets built out of some combination of these two. The first is trustworthiness, sometimes called valence. It's a threat or safety read. Does this face suggest someone who means you harm, or someone who doesn't? The second is dominance. And dominance isn't about whether you like the person or trust them at all. It's a separate question entirely. Does this face suggest strength, maturity, the capacity to do damage if it wanted to? Lowered brows, a heavier jaw, a stillness in the features, that's what pushes the dominance score up. Two axes, that's the whole test. Your brain isn't asking, who is this person? It's asking two much narrower questions, back to back, in the time it takes to notice a face is there at all, and then building the feeling you experience as a first impression on top of the answers. Now hold on, because Oosterhoff and Todorov were careful about what this does and doesn't prove, and you should be too. This is what perceivers do. It's the machinery of the judgment, not evidence that the judgment is correct. A face that scores high on dominance doesn't mean the person behind it actually holds power, actually wins fights, actually runs the room. The brain doesn't wait to find out. It scores the face and moves on, and whether that score matches reality is a completely separate question. The perceiving brain never bothers to ask. Here's the piece I've been holding back since the start of this film. Of those two axes, trustworthiness and dominance, one of them is what this entire 3 hours is about. Not trustworthiness. Not whether the room likes you, or believes you're a good person, or trusts your intentions. Dominance, the rank axis. The one Zink's scanner was tracking, the one Chiao's number line was measuring. That's the score this film is going to teach you to win. On sight, before a word gets exchanged, which raises the obvious next question. If a face gets scored on dominance the instant someone looks at it, what specifically is being scored? What is the brain actually hunting for in a jawline, a brow, a stillness in the features that makes it file one face high and another low? Because lowered brows and heavier jaw are the physical inputs. But physical structure isn't something you can build in an afternoon. What comes next is the part you can actually change. Faster than conscious thought. That's the honest way to say it, and it's the only way I'll say it. Because anyone who gives you an exact number of milliseconds for this is guessing. Nobody's produced that number. What the research supports is simpler and, honestly, worse. The read happens before you're aware you've been read. Stack up what you've got so far. Zink's scanner work shows the brain has dedicated hardware that represents rank. Hardware that runs harder the second the hierarchy looks unstable. Chiao's work shows that hardware isn't just noticing rank, it's computing it, using the same circuitry it uses to compare quantities, a number line running under the surface of what feels like a gut read. And Oosterhoff and Todorov show the face itself gets scored on that dominance axis, almost the instant it's seen, before a person has done anything at all except exist in your field of view. Put those three together, and you get a sequence, not a feeling. Sort, score, file. That's the order of operations. And all three steps are done before your first full sentence lands in the room. Think about what that means for the version of you that walks into a meeting having rehearsed the opening line. You've picked the words. You've got the tone right. You know exactly how you want to be received. And none of that has arrived yet, because the room already ran its calculation on your face, your stillness, or your fidget, your posture, in the gap before you spoke. The sentence you worked on is being delivered to a jury that already reached a verdict. Here's the objection you're probably forming right now, because it's the one everybody forms. But I made a good argument. You laid out the logic. You had the better case. You were right. And sure, You might have been. That's not the question the ranking system is answering. It never was. But you can win the argument completely, on the merits, word for word, and still get filed beneath somebody whose face and stillness scored higher in the 2 seconds before either of you opened your mouth. Being right and being ranked are not the same event, and they're not judged by the same part of the brain. So here's the reframe, and it's the one you need to sit with before this film goes any further. You are not being persuaded in that room. You are being classified. Persuasion is slow. It requires someone to listen to your case, weigh it against alternatives, update a belief. Classification doesn't wait for any of that. B. It's a sort, and sorts are fast by design, because the brain built this system to work in the exact conditions where you don't have time to reason things through. A stranger, a room, a hierarchy that needs settling before anyone's had a real conversation. That leaves one question hanging, and it's the one that turns this whole film from description into leverage. If you're being classified rather than persuaded, the system has to be running on some criterion. It's not scoring your argument. It's not scoring your resume. It's scoring something else, something visible, something read off your body in that gap before the sentence, something specific, and it's time to name it. Composure. That's the criterion. No more circling it. Stillness reads as high rank. Low reactivity reads as high rank. A body that doesn't rush, doesn't flinch, doesn't treat a provocation like an emergency. That's the input the system scores at the top of the line. And the opposite reads exactly as you'd expect. Agitation, a flinch. A rush defense, words tumbling out too fast, too loud, too soon. That's the input the system files at the bottom, as submission, before it's evaluated a single fact about whether the submission was warranted. Here's the claim in full, and I'm not going to dress it up. The brain built dedicated hardware, sitting in the visual and attention circuitry, the striatum, the parietal cortex, tracking rank like a quantity on a line, and it hands that hardware one signal above all others to sort by. How still you are under pressure. Not how smart you are. Not how right you are. How still. A room full of people running that calculation on each other, constantly. And the input it rewards is a nervous system that doesn't visibly react. Now, before you mistake this for something it isn't, this is not a case for hiding your feelings. Nobody's telling you to feel nothing, or to pretend you feel nothing. That's a different project, and it fails, for reasons we'll get to. What this is a claim about which state gets rewarded by a specific piece of machinery in every stranger you meet. You can feel whatever you feel. What the ranking system reads is what your body does with it in the seconds after. Composure is not the absence of a reaction. It's what a body looks like when the reaction doesn't run it. So here's where the film goes from here. You've seen the proof that this system exists, that it's separate from reasoning, that it runs faster than you can consciously intervene. What you haven't seen yet is where it came from. Why would a brain build hardware this specific, this automatic, this indifferent to fairness or logic? And the answer isn't found in a boardroom or in any human institution at all. It's older than that. Older than the deal on the table. Older than the meeting. Older than the language you'd use to describe any of it. To find where this system came from, you have to leave the conference room entirely. You have to go back past offices, past courts, past every human hierarchy that's ever been built on purpose, and land somewhere with no words in it at all. A troop of animals, working out who's on top, without a single sentence spoken between them. That's where this machine was built. That's where we're going next. A troop of primates, somewhere out in open grassland, and nobody said a word, because nobody can. No language, no titles, no meeting scheduled to sort out who's in charge. And yet within that troop, right now, every single member knows exactly where it stands. Who eats first? Who grooms who? Who yields the path when two animals approach it from opposite directions? That order got worked out, and it holds, without a sentence ever being available to negotiate it. This is the part that should reframe everything you've read so far. Hierarchy isn't a human invention. It's not something that showed up alongside language, or tools, or fire, or any of the things you'd point to as the start of culture. It's older than all of it. Language came later and got layered on top of a sorting system that was already running. Stanford, 2005, published in Science. A researcher named Sapolsky, who spent years in the field studying baboon troops, laid out how deep this goes. Rank doesn't just organize behavior, it gets written directly into the body's stress chemistry. Where an animal sits in the hierarchy shows up in its blood work, its cortisol, its baseline stress load, measurable and consistent. But here's where you have to be careful, because the obvious assumption is wrong. You'd guess the animals at the bottom carry the most stress, and the ones at the top float above it, calm because their position is secure. That's not what the data says. The direction depends entirely on whether the hierarchy is stable. In a stable troop, yes, subordinates typically carry the higher baseline stress. Their position is precarious, and their body knows it. But when the hierarchy goes unstable, when rank is actually contested, the picture flips. Sapolsky's own broader work documented moments where the alpha carried the heaviest stress load of anyone in the troop, because the alpha is the one with the most to lose, and everyone under him is circling. Say that plainly. Being on top doesn't mean being calm. It means having the most exposed position when the order stops holding. Stress chemistry tracks rank, but it tracks the security of that rank, not the number attached to it. Hold that next to what you already know from the scanner room. Zinc's unstable hierarchy finding, the amygdala switching on the moment rank could change, isn't just a human quirk cooked up in a lab. It's the same pressure Sapolsky found running through a baboon's bloodstream out in the field, decades before that scanner existed. The mechanism is old. It didn't start with you. Could. So if rank gets written into a body's chemistry this precisely, in a species with no words for any of it, that raises a sharper question. Chemistry doesn't just record where an animal sits. Under the right conditions, it can move where an animal sits. If stress hormones track rank, maybe another chemical determines it. And it turns out there's a study that didn't just watch that happen. It engineered it. 12 groups of vervet monkeys, 3 males to a group, each group its own small hierarchy waiting to be decided. This is UCLA and the Sepulveda VA, published in Brain Research in 1991. A researcher named Raleigh running an experiment that didn't just watch rank happen. It went in and touched the chemistry underneath it. Here's the setup. In each group of 3, Raleigh's team pharmacologically raised serotonergic activity in one male, then watched what happened to his position, raised it, and that male became dominant, reliably, across the 12 groups. Then they ran it the other direction, lower a male's serotonergic activity, and he dropped into subordinates, not sometimes, consistently enough that the researchers could treat rank as something the chemistry was producing, not just reflecting. That's the detail that should stop you. Up to this point, every finding in this film has shown you where rank gets tracked, or how it gets computed. This is the first one that shows a lever. Move the serotonin, and the position in the hierarchy moves with it. There's an earlier study that sets up why this mattered so much to the researchers in the first place. Raleigh's team had published a correlational finding back in 1984 in the Archives of General Psychiatry, showing that dominant male vervets were carrying roughly double the blood serotonin of subordinate males. And here's the part that made it more than a coincidence. When rank flipped, when a dominant male lost his position, the serotonin dropped with him. It wasn't a fixed trait sitting in his blood from birth. It was tracking the position itself, in real time, rising and falling as the position changed hands. Now, the caution, and I want to land it hard, because this is exactly the kind of finding that gets stolen and turned into nonsense. This is a small primate study. 3 males, 12 groups, a controlled lab manipulation of monkey brain chemistry. It is not an instruction to go find a supplement, boost your serotonin, and expect a promotion. Anybody who tells you this study means you should biohack your way into a hierarchy is reading past what the data supports. Raleigh's work says something narrower, and honestly, stranger. In this species, under these conditions, this specific chemical state and the top of the hierarchy were the same event, which is the reframe worth sitting with before we move past it. It's tempting to think of composure as a result of rank, something you get to feel once you've already won the position. Calm, because you made it to the top, but Raleigh's data cuts against that story. The calm, elevated serotonin state didn't just follow dominance. In the manipulation, it produced it. Causation ran in both directions at once. The chemistry supported the rank, and something about holding the rank sustained the chemistry. You can't cleanly separate the composed state from the high position, because in this study, they were the same variable, measured two different ways. Serotonin is one lever, and it's a primate lever, decades old, run in a lab most people have never heard of. But it's not the only chemistry researchers have found sitting underneath who rises and who doesn't. Humans have their own axis, one that's been tested directly in people, in real contested situations, and it doesn't run on serotonin alone. It runs on the tension between two hormones you've heard of your whole life, and almost certainly have the relationship between them completely backwards. Someone walks into a high-stakes room wanting the top spot. You can see it on them, that hunger to be the one who's deferred to, and it doesn't work. They push, they assert, they take up space on purpose, and the room doesn't file them where they wanted to land. The drive was real. The rank never showed up. Why not? University of Texas at Austin, 2010. Hormones and behavior. Researchers Mehta and Josephs went looking for the answer in two hormones everybody's heard of, and almost nobody understands correctly: testosterone and cortisol. What they found breaks the simple story wide open. Testosterone predicted dominant behavior, but only under one condition. Cortisol had to be low. When cortisol was high, the relationship didn't just weaken, it reversed. High cortisol blocked the testosterone-driven push toward dominance, or flipped it into something else entirely. So it's not testosterone alone. It's testosterone with a gatekeeper standing in front of it, and the gatekeeper is stress. Here's the plain translation, and it matters because it cuts against almost everything people assume about confidence in a room. Wanting rank while your body is stressed does not convert into rank. The drive is there. The hormone tied to that drive is elevated, and none of it lands because cortisol is jamming the signal. Want it while calm, though, and the same drive converts cleanly. Same hunger, different outcome. The only thing that changed is what the stress chemistry was doing underneath it. Now, the honest flag, because this finding got famous and famous findings get oversold. A 2019 meta-analysis by Deckers and colleagues looked across the accumulated data on this exact interaction and found it small and inconsistent, study to study. That doesn't erase Mehta and Josephs. It means you treat this as an influential, debated hypothesis, not a settled law of human behavior. The idea that calm gates, whether drive turns into dominance, is the leading explanation on the table right now. It is not proven beyond argument, and anyone who tells you otherwise is skipping past the actual state of the research. There's a related idea worth knowing, framed correctly. Utrecht University, 2009, the International Journal of Law and Psychiatry. Researchers Terberg, Morgan, and Van Honk proposed, in a theoretical review, that the ratio between testosterone and cortisol, not either hormone alone, might work as a marker for how prone someone is to social aggression and dominance seeking. That's a proposed framework, built out of existing findings, not a new experiment generating fresh data. Treat it as a way of thinking about the two hormones together, a lens, not a discovery in its own right. Put the two findings next to each other, and you get the shape of an engine. Drive on one side. Calm is the condition that lets the drive actually convert into rank on the other. Debated in its details. Yes. But the direction of the evidence points the same way every time it's been tested. Agitation doesn't just feel bad in a contested room. It may be actively disqualifying the exact ambition you walked in with, which raises the obvious next question. If calm is what lets drive convert into rank, what happens the first time someone actually wins? Does one win change anything about the chemistry underneath the next contest? Or does everybody start from zero every single time they walk back into the room? California Mice, Staged Fights, University of Wisconsin-Madison, 2005, published in Hormones and Behavior. Researchers Oyegbile and Marler set up contests with a clear winner and a clear loser, then went back afterward and measured what winning had done to the winner's body. Testosterone went up after a staged win. Not surprising on its own. Here's the part that matters. That post-fight rise in testosterone increased the odds of winning the next contest too, one the researcher set up later against a new opponent. And this had nothing to do with which mouse was actually stronger, faster, better built for a fight. The wins were staged. The researchers controlled who won the first round. What changed was the chemistry that followed, and that chemistry alone shifted the odds of a second, genuine win. Sit with what that means. Winning isn't just something that happens to an animal already positioned to win. Winning does something to the body afterward, something that makes the next win more likely, independent of whatever advantage got the first win in the first place. Rank isn't only measured by this chemistry, it gets manufactured by it. Say it plainly, the win doesn't just reflect that this mouse was dominant. The win manufactures more of the hunger and the hardware that produces dominance next time. It's a loop, not a snapshot. One outcome feeds the chemistry that shapes the next outcome, round after round, and the gap between a mouse who's won once and a mouse who's lost once widens with every contest that follows, even if nothing about their actual physical ability changed at all. Now, the caveat, and it needs to be said without softening. This is a mouse study. Staged contests, controlled hormone measurement, a clean lab environment, nothing like a boardroom or a negotiation. Human competition and testosterone have been studied too, but that data is noisier, harder to pin down, full of contradictions the animal work doesn't have. Call the human version of the winner effect suggestive. Not proven, an animal model pointing at something that probably operates in people too, but without the same clean causal chain. Oyegbile and Marler were able to draw in mice. Here's what you're left holding though, even with the caution attached. Hormones explain an engine running underneath rank, serotonin in the vervets, the testosterone cortisol gate in humans, and now this, winning itself as fuel for the next win. That's the chemistry. But chemistry alone doesn't decide who gets ranked in a room. Nobody's running blood tests at a negotiation table. What that room actually sees is a face, a posture, a stillness, or a flinch in the 2 seconds before anyone said a word worth judging. The engine runs underneath. The verdict gets read off the surface, and it's time to go back to that surface, because the field that studies it isn't one lab chasing one strange finding. It's bigger than that, and it has a name. Here's something worth naming plainly before this film goes any further into the face and the body. Everything you've just heard, the scanner work, the number line finding, the vervet serotonin experiment, the testosterone cortisol gate, the winner effect in mice, none of that is one lab's pet theory, a strange corner of research nobody else takes seriously. It's a recognized field. Dominance neuroscience is an actual area of study, with its own accumulated literature, its own reviews, its own name. Frontiers in Neuroscience, 2015. Researchers Watanabe and Yamamoto published a review paper surveying the neural mechanisms of social dominance across this exact body of work. Use it the way a review is meant to be used, not as a new discovery, but as confirmation that everything you've been given so far sits inside an established, ongoing, scientific conversation. This isn't fringe. It isn't a single surprising result someone's built a whole channel around. It's a field, and the findings in this film are drawn from inside it. Look at the through line without needing a list to see it. Brain hardware that tracks rank and runs harder when that rank is unstable. Primate chemistry, where raising or lowering one signal moves an animal's position in the hierarchy directly. Human hormone data, where drive only converts into dominance under one specific condition. An animal model, where winning itself manufactures the chemistry for the next win. Different species, different decades, different labs that never coordinated with each other. And every one of them lands on the same conclusion from a different direction. Rank is read and won through a state the body is in, not through an argument the mind makes. So here's the pivot, and it's the one that matters most right now. All of that chemistry, all of that circuitry, none of it is visible across a table. Nobody in a negotiation is drawing blood, or running a scan mid-sentence. What actually gets used against you, or for you, in real time, in a real room, is the face. The stillness or the flinch sitting on top of all that machinery. The only part of this entire system another person can actually see. Go back to the face in the room, because that's where all this proof turns into something you can use, or something that gets used on you. The chemistry explains why the state matters. The face is where the state gets read. And the next question is exactly how still a face has to be before a stranger, without thinking about it for even a second, files it as the one in charge. Picture the setup. Raiders sitting in front of a screen, looking at a series of male faces, each one posed with a different expression: neutral, angry, sad, ashamed. Their job is simple: rate how dominant each face looks, nothing else. No context, no names, no backstory, just the expression and a number. University of Haifa, 2009, published in the journal Emotion. Researchers Hareli, Shomrat, and Hess ran exactly this experiment, and the pattern that came back should sound familiar by now, because it's the same conclusion this film keeps arriving at, from a different direction. Neutral expressions got rated as more dominant, so did angry ones. Sadness and shame dragged the dominant score down, every time. A soft or reactive emotion sitting on a face reads as lower rank, automatically, to a rater who has no other information to go on. Think about what that actually says. It's not that a blank face is neutral, in the sense of giving nothing away. It's that a blank face gets scored as strong, and a face showing hurt or embarrassment gets scored as weak, before anyone in the room has said a single fact about who's actually right. Now, two caveats, and you should hear both, because this isn't a clean universal law, and pretending it is would be dishonest. First, the pattern is gendered. For women in this same research, the rule flips. Anger and happiness read as the most dominant expressions, and neutral reads as less dominant, not more. Whatever's happening with a still male face doesn't map cleanly onto a still female one. Second, context matters. In victory, in a performance setting, genuine positive emotion, real joy at a real win, can outrank a poker face entirely. Nobody looks at an athlete celebrating a win and files them as low status because they let their face show it. So here's the honest summary, and it's more useful than a false rule would be. This isn't one single blockbuster finding that proves stillness always wins. It's convergent evidence, several separate pieces pointing the same direction under specific conditions. Composure under provocation, not performance, not celebration, and largely, though not entirely, for men. Hareli's data joins Oosterhoff and Todorov's dominance axis, and Zink's rank tracking hardware to build one consistent picture, not a single law carved in stone. But notice what that picture is actually built from. It's not built from what a still face gains. It's built from what a reactive one loses. Sadness and shame didn't just fail to help in that study. They actively dragged the score down, below neutral, below anger, which means the cost isn't reserved for outright collapse, for someone visibly falling apart in front of a room. It shows up at a much smaller scale than that. A flicker of hurt, a half second of shame crossing someone's face before they catch it. That's already enough, according to this data, to file someone lower than they would have landed by showing nothing at all. So if a still face is worth this much, the question that actually matters now isn't what stillness gives you. It's what an unstill one costs you. In the ordinary moments nobody thinks to notice, long before anything reaches the size of a real collapse. You've watched it happen. Someone sitting across a table, holding it together fine, right up until a comment lands somewhere it wasn't supposed to. And for maybe half a second, something in their face moves. A blink comes faster. The voice climbs a half step. Nothing dramatic. You'd have trouble even describing it if someone asked you to. But you saw it, and something in you registered it before you decided to pay attention. That's the leak. Worth naming directly, because you're going to need the word for the rest of this film. Here's what actually leaks, in practice, in a real room. A pitch that rises slightly, on a sentence that should have stayed flat. A blink rate that speeds up under a question that shouldn't have been hard to answer. A gaze that drops for less than a second, then comes back up like nothing happened. A sentence that comes out a beat too fast. More words than the moment called for. filling space that didn't need filling. None of these are collapse. None of them look, on their own, like losing control of anything. They're small. That's exactly what makes them work against you. Because here's the mechanism, and it's not complicated once you've got the earlier sections behind you. Every one of those small signals is a data point, and the ranking system you've spent the last 2 hours learning about doesn't grade on intention. It doesn't ask whether you meant to show that flicker, or whether the comment actually rattled you as much as your blink rate suggested. It just reads the output: rising pitch, faster blink, dropped gaze, rushed sentence. Each one gets filed the same way. A flinch gets filed, as evidence the alarm ran the body, even for a fraction of a second. And evidence the alarm ran the body is exactly what this system scores as submission. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable, because this is the part people resist hardest. You don't get credit for being right if your body is leaking while you say it. You can have the accurate figure, the fair rebuttal, the argument that would hold up in any honest review of the facts. And none of that overrides what the room just watched your face do in the half second before the words came out. Two systems, running at once, on two totally different inputs. One of them is grading your content, the other is grading your leak. And the leak doesn't wait for the content to finish before it files its verdict. This is also why the leak matters more than an obvious flinch does. A flinch is rare. Most people, most of the time, hold it together well enough that nothing dramatic ever shows. But almost nobody holds every leak. The pitch, the blink, the half-second drop, these show up constantly. In ordinary meetings, in ordinary conversations. And they're small enough that the person leaking never even notices they did it. Which means the ranking system is running its comparison constantly too, on inputs you don't even know you're producing. So the face isn't the only place this shows up. There's a specific channel carrying rank information that has nothing to do with expression at all, something that operates below where most people are even watching. It's the eyes themselves, not what crosses them, but where they point, and for how long. Two people in a meeting, eyes lock across the table, for maybe a second and a half. Nothing's been said about it. Nobody's announced a contest. But one of them looks away first, down at a notepad, over at a laptop screen, anywhere else, and the other one doesn't. You've been on both sides of this exact moment, and you already know it registers as something, even if you couldn't have said what. Harvard Business School and the University of Melbourne, 2017, published in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology. Researchers Holland, Wolf, Lusser, and Cuddy ran a study on where people actually point their attention when they're shown images of others in dominant versus submissive postures. What they found, observers looked less at the people in dominant postures than at the people in submissive ones. Less, not more. The instinct you'd assume, that a room's eyes gravitate toward whoever holds the power, gets it backwards. People look away from dominance. They look at submission. This tracks a pattern that shows up across primate species too. Gaze aversion, functioning as an appeasement signal. A subordinate animal, breaking eye contact with a more dominant one, as a way of signaling it isn't a threat. Holland and her colleagues found the human version of the same wiring. Something in a dominant posture makes other people's eyes slide off it, the same way a subordinate primate's gaze slides off an alpha. It isn't looking to challenge. Here's the direct implication, and it inverts what most people assume about eye contact in a tense moment. Averting your gaze first doesn't read as politeness, or as giving someone space, or as simply looking away because you had somewhere else to look. It reads as deference. It's the human equivalent of the exact appeasement signal that shows up throughout the primate literature. And the reverse of that finding matters just as much. If dominant postures pull less attention rather than more, then holding still, unbothered, not performing anything at all, is what actually gets other people's eyes to move first. You don't have to outstare anyone. The room does the work for you, the same way it did in Holland's data, sliding its attention off the person who isn't giving it anything to react to. Now, the honest gap, because this is exactly the place to be careful rather than convenient. There is no single decisive study that goes and directly measures whether visible fidgeting, actual anxious movement, gets rated as low status in the moment it happens. What exists is the gaze aversion literature, solid on its own terms. showing that averting attention functions as an appeasement signal across primates, including us. Extending that to cover every small anxious movement, the tapping foot, the shifting weight, the darting glance, is a reasonable extrapolation from that literature. It is not, itself, a cited fact, and this film isn't going to pretend otherwise just because the extrapolation happens to be convenient. So hold that distinction carefully. Gaze aversion as deference, well supported. Fidgeting as low status, reasonable, unproven, worth saying out loud rather than smuggling past you. And that carefulness matters more than it might seem right now, because it's about to run headfirst into the single biggest myth standing between you and how this system actually gets influenced. You've heard this one. Stand like this for 2 minutes, feet apart, hands on your hips, chin up, chest open, like you just won something. Do it before the interview, before the negotiation, before the meeting, where you need the room on your side. It'll change your hormones. It'll change how the whole thing goes. This is one of the most watched ideas in the entire self-improvement world, and for years, almost nobody questioned it. Here's where it came from. Psychological Science, 2010. Researchers Carney, Cuddy, and Yap ran a study on what they called power posing, expansive, open body positions, held for a short window before a stressful task. The sample was small, 42 people, worth knowing plainly before you hear the claim, because a finding this famous, built on a group that size, should always come with the number attached. The claim itself, stated exactly as it was made, holding an expansive posture raised testosterone, lowered cortisol, and increased people's willingness to take risks afterward. 2 minutes, standing a certain way, and your actual hormone levels moved as a result. It's easy to see why this took off. It's simple, it's actionable, it fits neatly into a 2-minute video, and it promises exactly the kind of shortcut everyone wants into the exact chemistry this film has spent. The last several sections building up as the real engine behind rank. Low cortisol, converting drive into dominance. The whole dual hormone story, from Meta and Joseph's, seemingly available to you for the cost of standing differently for 120 seconds. And for a while, that's exactly how it got used. Coaches taught it. Speakers built entire talks around it. It became one of those ideas so widely repeated that repetition itself started to function as proof. Here's what you need to sit with before this film goes any further. That claim did not survive contact with better data. Not partially, not with some footnote softening the blow. When researchers with larger samples went back and tried to reproduce what Carney, Cuddy, and Yap found, the hormonal and behavioral effects were not there. That's worth pausing on before the next section spells out exactly how it fell apart. Because the shape of this failure matters as much as the failure itself. A small study produced a clean, simple, appealing story about hacking your way into the chemistry of dominance. The story spread faster than anyone checked it. And underneath the appeal was a claim about testosterone and cortisol moving in response to nothing but a stance held in an empty room. No provocation, no real stakes, no actual contest with another person on the other side of it. Hold that shape in mind. A study, a claim, a spread. Now, go straight into what happened when someone finally ran it again, at a scale big enough to actually tell you the truth. Psychological Science, 2015. Researchers Rainhill and colleagues ran the same power posing procedure again, only this time with 200 people, nearly 5 times the original sample. They measured the same things: testosterone, cortisol, willingness to take risks. And the hormones didn't move. The behavior didn't move. The only thing that showed up was a self-reported feeling of power. People saying they felt more confident after standing that way. Feeling it, and the actual chemistry doing nothing at all, sitting right next to each other in the same dataset. Then came the second blow. Simmons and Simonson, 2017, ran what's called a P-curve analysis on the original data, a technique built specifically to check whether a set of findings actually contains real evidence, or whether it's the kind of result you'd expect from chance and selective reporting. Their conclusion: the original power posing data carried no evidentiary value. Not weak evidence. None. Here's the fact that should land hardest. And I want to say it plainly, rather than let it slide by. Dana Carney, the original first author on the 2010 study, the one whose name was attached to the finding. Everyone built talks and courses and confidence coaching businesses around, publicly disavowed the effect herself. In 2016, she went on record saying she no longer believed the effect was real. Not a critic tearing the study down from outside. The person who ran it, saying it out loud, before the room she'd built ever asked her to. So here's the lesson, and there's no soft way to say it that would also be honest. You cannot pose your way into rank. 2 minutes with your hands on your hips does not touch the testosterone cortisol gate this film spent an entire section establishing. It does not touch the composed state Raleigh found sitting underneath serotonin in the vervets. It touches nothing real. It produces a feeling, and feelings alone don't move. A ranking system built to read the actual state of your nervous system, not your self-report of it. But here's what makes this failure useful, instead of just embarrassing. Think about what had to be true for power posing to fail this completely. If a rehearsed shape, held for 2 minutes with your chin up and your chest out, could fool the system this film has spent 16 sections describing, then the whole claim of this documentary would collapse right along with it. Composure would just be a costume. Anyone could put it on. It can't be faked that easily. And that's exactly the proof that the real signal has to come from somewhere. The posture never touched. Somewhere deeper than the shape you hold your body in for a photograph. The system isn't reading your stance. It's reading something underneath the stance, something Carney's disavowal accidentally confirmed by showing you, in the clearest way research ever has, what doesn't work. Which means it's time to go back to the room this film opened on, the one deciding who runs it before anyone's spoken. Now you're walking back in armed with what fails. The question left standing is what doesn't. Go back to that boardroom from the very start of this film. Somebody walks in, and before a single sentence gets exchanged, everyone in that room already has a rough sense of where this person sits. You know that feeling. You've had it from both sides. The moment you were the one being filed, and the moment you were the one doing the filing without meaning to. Only now you're standing in that same room, with 3 hours of evidence sitting behind your eyes, instead of a vague hunch. You know there's dedicated hardware in the brain whose entire job is clocking rank, separate from whatever's processing the actual words being said. You know composure is the specific input that hardware rewards, a still face and an even voice getting filed upward, agitation and flinch getting filed down. And you know, now, with a name and a year and a disavowal attached to it, that you cannot manufacture that state by striking a shape with your body and holding it for 2 minutes in an empty room. That last piece matters more than it might seem sitting next to the other two. Because if posture could fake it, this whole film would just be a costume-fitting session. Stand like this, win the room. It doesn't work that way, and the failure of that shortcut is the reason the question in front of you now actually has weight. So here's the open question, stated plainly. If you can't fake it, what's actually different in the body of someone who has it? Not someone performing calm for the length of a single meeting, holding a pose, managing their face through sheer effort of will. Someone who walks into that same contested room and the stillness is just what's there, the resting condition, nothing being suppressed, because nothing's trying to break loose. That's a different question than anything this film has answered so far. Sections 1 through 16 showed you that the ranking system exists, that it runs on composure, and that faking composure through posture alone doesn't move it. None of that tells you what's actually happening inside a person, for whom composure isn't a performance at all. What's different in the chemistry? What's different in the circuitry? What state their nervous system is actually sitting in, before the room even walks through the door? That's where this goes next. Not a study proving the ranking system exists. You've got 16 sections of that already. A different kind of question. The chemistry and the circuitry underneath. A calm state that's genuine, built out of what's real in a body, rather than staged for an audience. What's really different in someone the room defers to, underneath the surface the room is actually reading. 2 people, 2 different mornings, walking toward the same kind of high-stakes interview. Different buildings, different jobs, different names. Nobody needs invented for this to work. Because the scene is the same one that plays out constantly in front of hiring panels and investors and boards. Both of them feel their heart doing the same thing before they open the door, pounding, fast, loud enough in their own chest that they'd swear the person across the table could hear it. Here's the problem with assuming that tells you anything. Arousal alone doesn't predict who walks out ranked above the other, because both of them are activated, both hearts spiked. If the ranking system worked off raw physiological arousal, off whether a stress response fired at all, it would have nothing to sort with here. It would see two identical readings and no way to choose between them. So go back to what composure actually meant, back when this film first defined it, before the hormone data even existed on the page. It was never the absence of a stress response. It was what a still face and an even voice broadcast to a room, regardless of what was happening underneath. Now, lay the chemistry over that definition. The serotonin state Raleigh found sitting underneath rank in the vervets. The testosterone cortisol gate Meta and Joseph's found in stressed humans. The winner effect Oyegbele and Marler found, compounding in mice. None of it said the winning state feels nothing. It said the winning state converts into something the room can read as rank, and the losing state doesn't, even when both start from the same spike. Which means the difference between these two people walking into their interviews was never whether the alarm went off. It went off in both of them, the same jump in heart rate, the same surge that any monitor in the room would have caught if you'd wired them both up beforehand. The difference sits somewhere else entirely, in what happens to that spike in the next few seconds, after it's already fired, before either of them has said a word. One of them lets the surge run the body. Voice climbs a half step. Sentences come out a beat too fast. Eyes drop for that half second. Section 13, already named as a leak. The other one's heart is doing the exact same thing, and none of it reaches the surface. Not because it isn't there. Because something in the next few seconds catches it before it becomes an output the room can read. That's the actual site of the difference, and it's not visible from the outside, the way a posture is visible. It's not a shape you can copy off somebody. It's a process, happening in a window of time, so short neither person could describe it if you ask them afterward. To understand what that process actually is, you have to look at where the brain treats uncertainty about rank as an emergency in its own right, because that's the same machinery this film already put a name to, back when it first showed you a hierarchy in the middle of changing. Only this time, it's not describing a room full of strangers, sorting a stranger. It's describing what happens inside a single body, in the seconds after the alarm fires, and before anyone else in the room has any idea it went off at all. Klein. Go back to the scanner room from earlier in this film, the one where Zink and her colleagues at NIMH found something extra switching on. Remember, the two conditions. A stable hierarchy, rank fixed, nobody's position up for grabs, and an unstable one, where rank could still change. In the stable condition, the brain recruited its attention circuitry, and nothing more. In the unstable one, the amygdala and the medial prefrontal cortex switched on too, extra machinery, running only when the hierarchy itself was still being decided. Here's what that actually means once you stop treating it as a scanner result and start treating it as an operating instruction. The brain doesn't just track rank. It tracks confidence in that rank. And when confidence drops, when nobody's sure who's actually on top, it spends more resources trying to find out. Uncertainty about who's in charge isn't a neutral, low-stakes moment for the brain. It's flagged as something closer to an emergency, worth the amygdala's attention, worth pulling in circuitry that a stable hierarchy never needed at all. Think about what that does to a room in practice. A new team, first meeting, nobody's established anything yet. A leadership change, the old rank suddenly meaningless, everyone recalculating at once. A negotiation, where neither side has shown its hand. In every one of these, the brains in that room aren't coasting on an existing verdict. They're actively hunting, harder than they would in a settled hierarchy, for something to lock onto. The amygdala does something the hippocampus doesn't. It selectively tracks social rank specifically, picking that one variable out and treating it differently from the rest of what the hippocampus has mapped. And here's the detail worth sitting with longer than the rest. The strength of that amygdala signal predicted how strongly rank actually shaped what people did next. Not just whether they'd noticed the hierarchy, whether it went on to steer their behavior once the moment to act arrived. Read that carefully, because it's not the same claim as Zinc's. Zinc showed where rank gets registered, and showed that instability recruits more of the same circuitry to keep watching. Qumran adds the piece Zinc couldn't answer, how strongly that registered signal ends up governing what a person actually does. A weak amygdala responds to someone's rank, and that rank barely touches later behavior. A strong one, and rank starts running the decisions, whether or not the person consciously meant to let it. State the plain version of that outright. The more strongly your amygdala flags someone's position, the more that position quietly steers what you do around them, deferring, hesitating, giving way, without you ever running the calculation out loud. You don't decide to treat the calm person in the room as the one in charge. Your amygdala has already flagged the rank, and the flagging itself is doing the steering, now connected to everything this film has built toward composure so far. If the amygdala is the gatekeeper reading rank and converting it into behavior, then whatever gets read into that gate matters more than peace, anything else in the room. And you already know, from Zinc, that instability makes this gate run hotter, hungrier for a signal. You already know, from Hareli, Oosterhoff, and Todorov, that stillness is exactly the signal a face is built to hand it. Put those together, and the amygdala isn't a neutral bystander watching rank happen. It's the exact piece of hardware composure is built to walk straight into. That's the mechanism, fully assembled now. Hardware that tracks rank, hardware that runs harder when rank is uncertain. A gatekeeper that converts the tracked signal into real behavior, in proportion to how strongly it fires. 3 separate findings, 3 separate labs, 1 machine. What's left isn't more proof. It's what this machine actually does to a person once it's finished deciding. Picture a meeting, nothing unusual about it, until someone drops a comment aimed to needle, not a real argument. A jab, timed for effect, the kind of thing said less to make a point, and more to see what it does to the person on the receiving end. And the person on the receiving end takes it. Not visibly, not dramatically, but they take it. Piece. You already know the physiology, because this film built it, piece by piece, over the last 2 hours. The alarm fires, the same spike. Section 18 put in both of those interview candidates before either one opened their mouth. Zinc circuitry lights up the moment rank feels like it's in question, which a jab like this is designed to make it feel. And if the person doesn't catch the surge in the next few seconds, it leaks out exactly the way Section 13 named: pitch, rising, a sentence coming out too fast. A half second where the eyes drop before they come back up. Here's the plain cost, stated without decoration. Every one of those leaks is a data point, and the room's ranking hardware doesn't pause to check whether the comeback was accurate. It doesn't wait for the sentence to finish before filing something. Qumran's amygdala is already doing its job, reading the rank signal and starting to steer what everyone else in that room does next. And it's reading the flinch, not the argument. This is where the asymmetry gets uncomfortable. The room will not remember what you said in that meeting nearly as well as it remembers what your body did while you said it. You can be right. You can have the better case, the fair rebuttal, the number that actually holds up. None of that changes what already got filed in the half second before your first word landed. 2 systems, running in parallel, and only one of them was ever grading content. Now here's where it would be easy to take the wrong lesson from all of this, so it's worth heading off directly. The answer isn't gritting your teeth through the jab, locking your jaw, holding your face still through sheer will while the surge runs underneath it anyway. That's not composure. That's suppression, and suppression is its own kind of leak, just a slower, more effortful one. A held jaw radiates its own tension. A forced stillness has its own tell, a stiffness that reads as strain rather than calm, because the room isn't looking for a person managing a reaction. It's looking for a person who never had one worth managing in the first place. So, the target was never learning to hide the flinch better. It's having nothing there to hide. Nothing breaking loose in the first place means nothing needs holding down, and a room's amygdala can't file a leak that was never produced. Close quote. Close quote. Close quote. That's a different problem than the one most people try to solve, And the rest of this film is going to spend real time on exactly what separates a suppressed reaction from a genuinely absent one, because they do not look the same from across a table. And only one of them survives contact with a room that's actually paying attention. Watch a face that's working hard to hold itself still. Not calm. Working. There's a difference, and you've seen it even if you never had language for it before now. The jaw sets a little too firm. The eyes stay a little too fixed. Nothing moves when things like this normally would, and something about that absence itself reads as strange rather than steady. That's a frozen face, and it's its own kind of tell, sitting right next to the flinch it's trying to cover. Here's why a forced mask fails. Plainly, holding a face in place against a real surge underneath takes effort, and effort doesn't stay contained to wherever you're aiming it. It leaks sideways, into micro-tension around the mouth, into a jaw that's slightly too locked, into a stillness that looks held rather than resting. A room's ranking hardware isn't sophisticated enough to know why a face looks strained. It just reads strain, and strain is its own signal, close enough to agitation that it gets filed somewhere near it, rather than anywhere close to genuine composure. So draw the contrast directly, because it's the whole point of this section. Real composure has nothing to hide, because there's nothing breaking loose underneath it in the first place. A suppressed reaction is a fight happening in real time. Alarm pushing one way, effort pushing back the other, and that fight produces its own visible residue, even when the person doing it thinks they've won. A genuinely calm state isn't fighting anything. There's no contest going on beneath the surface for anyone to accidentally glimpse. Go back to Horelli's finding from section 12, because it's worth being precise about what that neutral, high-dominance face actually was. It wasn't a strained face. The men rated most dominant in that data weren't gritting through anything. Their expression read as unbothered, not as controlled. That's not a small distinction. A rater doesn't need to consciously notice the difference between held still and actually still to score them differently. The ranking hardware reads it anyway, the same way it reads a leak it can't name. Here's the reframe, stated as cleanly as this film can manage it. You're not building a mask. You're lowering what needs to be masked in the first place. Those are not the same project, and they don't produce the same result on a face across a table. One of them is a person managing a reaction moment to moment, spending energy to keep something contained. The other is a person for whom there's simply less to contain, because the surge that would normally demand that management isn't running as hot to begin with. That's a harder thing to build than a mask, and it should be, because a mask can be put on in a mirror before you walk into the room. And this film already spent an entire section proving that shortcuts like that one don't survive. Contact with the hardware, actually doing the reading. What's left is a real question, worth asking plainly instead of skipping past. If the goal isn't hiding the alarm better, what specifically gets lowered, and by what mechanism does lowering it actually happen? Someone in a meeting gives a genuinely good answer. The logic holds, the numbers check out. Every clause connects to the next one exactly the way it should, and the whole time they're saying it, their hands won't sit still. Their voice is climbing. Their eyes keep cutting toward the door like they're checking for an exit that isn't there. You've watched this happen. The explanation was airtight. Nobody in that room walked out convinced by it. Here's why. The ranking system running underneath that meeting doesn't parse logic. It parses signal. It was never built to check an argument for internal consistency, because that's not its job. Its job, going back to Zink's circuitry and Kumaran's amygdala, is reading rank off a body in real time, and a body under strain is handing it exactly the kind of input it's built to file as submission, regardless of what the mouth attached to that body happens to be saying. So name the mismatch directly, because this is the part that actually explains why good arguments lose rooms all the time. The explanation is aimed at the room's reasoning brain, the part that follows a sentence, weighs a claim, checks whether the conclusion follows from the premise. But the body delivering that explanation is broadcasting, at the exact same time, to a completely different piece of hardware, the one this film has spent 22 sections mapping. And the ranking brain doesn't wait for the reasoning brain to finish its work before filing a verdict. It's already filed one. Here's the line worth sitting with, because it's the cleanest way to state what's actually happening in that room. The content of your words and the rank of your body get scored by two separate systems, running in parallel, and only one of them decides what the room actually does next. You can win the argument and lose the room in the same 60 seconds, and neither outcome tells you anything about the other, because they were never being judged by the same judge. This isn't a small wrinkle in an otherwise fair process. It's the whole shape of the problem this film exists to describe. A person can walk out of that meeting having said everything correctly and still watch the room defer to someone else. Someone who said less, argued worse, and never once looked like they needed to win anything. That gap between being right and being ranked isn't a mystery. It's structural, built into the fact that two different pieces of hardware are grading two different things at once, and that structure isn't new information. This film already showed you exactly where it comes from, back when it described rank computation running on the same circuitry the brain uses to compare quantities. Nothing to do with the machinery that processes language at all. Worth going back to that finding directly, because it's the proof that this mismatch was never incidental. It was built into the architecture from the start. Go back to Chiao's finding from Northwestern, the one about the inferior parietal cortex. Judging where someone sits in a status hierarchy recruits the same intraparietal machinery the brain uses to compare quantities, sizes, magnitudes, one number against another. Rank gets computed like arithmetic. That's not a metaphor this film invented to make the point land easier. That's what the scan showed. Sit with what that actually means, for the mismatch just described. If rank were processed in the brain's language areas, in whatever handles syntax and argument, and the logical connective tissue between one claim and the next, you'd expect a good argument to at least have a shot at moving the number. Reasoning and rank would at least be running through overlapping wiring, close enough to influence each other. But that's not the architecture. Rank runs through the same machinery as magnitude comparison. Language runs somewhere else entirely. They're not neighbors. They're not even on the same floor. That's why a well-reasoned argument can be true, complete, airtight, and still lose the rank contest happening in the same room at the same time. It's not that the room fails to notice the argument was good. It's that the argument was never being evaluated by whatever circuitry was assigning rank in the first place. Two separate computations, running on two separate systems, and the one built to compare magnitudes doesn't check its work against the one built to parse sentences. It doesn't need to. It was never waiting on it. Here's where this usually produces a specific kind of frustration, and it's worth naming it before it curdles into something else. You did the work. You made the case. You said the true thing, clearly, at the right moment, and the room still filed someone else above you, someone who said less and flinched less. That frustration is fair. It's also not going to change anything, because it's aimed at a system that was never running the vote you thought you were in. So say the thing plainly, because softening, it wouldn't be honest. This is not fair. Fairness was never the criterion the rank computation system runs on. It wasn't built to reward the better argument. It was built, going back 300 million years further than any boardroom, to answer one question fast. Who do I defer to right now? That question gets answered by magnitude circuitry reading a body, not by language circuitry reading a case. Once you actually accept that, something shifts in how you walk into a room like this. You stop treating the rank contest and the argument as the same contest, because they never were. And that clears the way for the next part of this, which isn't more diagnosis. It's the specific behaviors, one at a time, that this magnitude reading system scores as low rank the instant it sees them, starting with the one that happens the fastest, before a person even finishes deciding to speak. An accusation lands in a meeting. Not a physical threat, nothing close to it, just a pointed question about a mistake, aimed straight at the person who made it. And the answer comes back almost before the question finishes. Too fast, too much. 3 sentences where one would do. A defense that keeps going past the point where it needed to stop. Like the person can't quite make themselves quiet down until the room believes them. Call this what it is. The rush defense. And it's a specific tell, not a vague impression. You know it when you hear it, because you've done it yourself at some point. Felt the words come out of you a half beat quicker than you meant them to. Piling detail on top of detail as if enough words could outrun the accusation itself. Here's why speed reads as submission rather than strength. Answering that fast signals the accusation landed as a threat. Something urgent enough to require an instant response. No room left to even consider not responding right away. That urgency, is the tell. It's the same alarm this film has tracked since the two hearts in section 18. The same surge, section 21, described leaking out as a raised pitch or a hurried sentence. A rush defense is that leak, just wearing the shape of an answer instead of a flinch. Now put the composed response next to it. Someone hears the same accusation, and there's a pause before anything comes back. Not a long one. Just enough room for a breath most people in that meeting wouldn't consciously register. That pause says something the rush defense never can. The accusation didn't land as urgent. It didn't land as a threat worth an instant reaction. It landed as a thing to be answered on the answerer's own schedule, not the accuser's. That's the whole difference, and it has nothing to do with which answer is actually correct. A slow, composed response to a fair accusation and a slow, composed response to an unfair one look the same from across a table. So does a rush defense against a true charge and a rush defense against a false one. The room's ranking hardware was never grading the content. It was grading the gap, or the absence of one. Land the principle plainly, because it's the whole point of naming this tell before the ones that follow it. The length of the pause before you speak is itself a rank signal, delivered before a single word leaves your mouth, before the room has any idea what your answer is even going to be. A rush defense files you as someone the accusation could reach. A held pause files you as someone it couldn't. That filing happens on timing alone. The same magnitude reading circuitry from Chiao's data doing what it always does, clocking a gap in time, the way it clocks a gap in size, and handing down a verdict before your sentence starts. Speed is the first tell. It's not the only one. The next one isn't about how fast you answer, it's about how loud. An argument climbs, not in content, in volume. Someone's voice starts creeping upward, pitch and loudness both. And by the third exchange, they're nearly cutting the other person off, talking over the room instead of into it. Watch the faces around the table while it happens. Nobody's leaning toward the loud one. They're leaning away. Here's why volume reads as low rank instead of strength, and it's worth being direct about it, because most people have the instinct backward. A voice climbing under pressure isn't a display of control. It's a broadcast of the opposite. That surge takes over the vocal cords the same way it takes over everything else this film has already tracked. The pitch, the pace, the half-second gaze drop. Loud isn't a choice being made from a place of authority. It's the alarm reaching the throat, the same signal. Section 25 clocked in a rush defense, just louder this time, instead of faster. Now put a flat, even, unraised voice next to it. In the exact same argument, same accusation, same provocation, nothing climbs. The volume sits where it started. The pace doesn't quicken, and that steadiness does something the raised voice can't. It reads as unbothered. And unbothered, going all the way back to the poker face data this film already covered, is the specific state that files as high rank. Not because it's trying to look powerful, because it's the one signal in the room that isn't leaking. That's the whole mechanism, and there's no need to reopen everything. Section 6, already built about what composure actually is. A raised voice is just agitation with a microphone. It's the alarm system doing the talking instead of the person, and a room's ranking hardware doesn't distinguish between righteous volume and panicked volume. It just registers volume, climbing, uncontrolled, and files it exactly where it files any other leak. So say the line plainly, because it's the cleanest way to close this one out. Loud is not powerful. Loud is loud. A raised voice might feel, from the inside, like force, like finally pushing back hard enough to be heard. From across the table it reads as a nervous system that lost its grip on the vocal cords, and a room's hardware was built by watching bodies for exactly that kind of tell for longer than any of us have had language. There's a version of this that people mistake for the opposite case, worth naming so it doesn't get confused with what's actually being described here. Someone raising their voice on purpose, a deliberate, controlled escalation used as a tool, is a different animal entirely, and this film isn't claiming that never works in specific contexts. What it's describing is the far more common version, the voice that climbs because the person can't stop it from climbing, the pitch that rises because the alarm already fired and nobody's catching it, before it reaches the mouth. That's the one the room reads as submission, wearing the costume of anger. Volume was the second tell. There's a smaller one left, and it doesn't need a raised voice to give someone away. It just needs a pair of eyes that can't hold still. Two people are locked in an argument, close range, no table between them this time. Eyes meet and hold, the way eyes do in the middle of a real disagreement, and then one of them looks away first. Down, to the side, just for a beat, before coming back. That's it. That's the whole moment. And everyone who saw it happen knows, without being able to explain why, that something just shifted between those two people. This film already covered the research behind that shift, back when it looked at Holland, Wolf, Lusser, and Cuddy's 2017 study out of Harvard Business School and the University of Melbourne. Observers in that data looked less at people holding dominant postures than at people holding submissive ones. The same pattern primates show when a lower-ranked animal breaks eye contact with a higher-ranked one to signal it isn't a threat. That was covered as an observation before. Here it is again. Except now you're not watching strangers on a screen. You're watching it happen live, in a confrontation with real stakes attached. Breaking eye contact first in that kind of exchange functions exactly the way it does in the primate data. It's an appeasement signal, whether or not the person breaking it means to send one. The gaze drop says, without a word attached to it, that the moment felt like too much to hold steady through, and a room's ranking hardware doesn't require a translator for that. It reads the drop the same way it reads a rushed defense or a climbing voice, as evidence of where the alarm won. Now flip it around, because this is the part worth stating directly. Holding a steady, unhurried gaze through that same exchange doesn't require aggression to register as dominant. It doesn't need a hard stare, a challenge, anything performed or pointed. It only needs to be unafraid. A gaze that simply doesn't move, doesn't drop, doesn't search for an exit, reads as someone who isn't finding the moment threatening in the first place. That's the whole mechanism. Not intensity. Absence of retreat. Here's the caveat this film owes you, stated as plainly now as it would have been earlier, because it matters more now that it's useful than it did as an abstract point. There is no single study proving that visible fidgeting or general anxious movement gets rated as low status on its own. What's solid is the gaze aversion data itself, the link between averting your eyes and reading as submissive. Extending that to cover every nervous habit, every restless hand, every shifting foot, is a reasonable extension of that finding. It is not, itself, a cited result. Say that clearly rather than letting it slide by now that the point is finally paying off. 3 tells named across 3 sections now. Speed of response, volume of voice, direction of a gaze, different outputs, different parts of the body producing them. And before moving into what's actually about to happen with all 3 of them together, there's one thing left to name. What they all have in common, underneath the surface. Before this film moves into the moment, everything it's built gets put to use. Speed, volume, gaze. 3 separate tells, 3 separate parts of the body producing them, and it would be easy to treat them as 3 separate problems requiring 3 separate fixes. They aren't. Underneath all 3 sits the same thing, wearing different clothes, depending on which output it happens to leak through. Every one of them is the nervous system's alarm, reaching the surface. That's the whole list. A rushed defense is the alarm reaching the mouth before the mind finishes deciding what to say. A raised voice is the alarm reaching the vocal cords, taking over pitch and pace the same way it takes over a pulse. A dropped gaze is the alarm reaching the eyes, the oldest exit available to a body that wants out of a moment it's decided is a threat. Different exits, same fire. So here's the principle worth stating plainly, because it changes what you're actually supposed to watch for. Rank isn't read off any single tell on its own. There's no checklist where a room's hardware scores your pace, then your volume, then your eyes, and adds up a total. It's reading something simpler and harder to fake, whether the alarm is running the body at all, in that moment, regardless of which output happens to carry it. Catch it before it reaches the mouth, and it never gets the chance to reach the voice either. Let it reach the voice, and the eyes usually aren't far behind. They're not independent variables. They're symptoms of one condition. Which brings this all the way back to where this film first named the thing it's been building toward, since the cue got introduced and left unexplained. Composure was called the one signal the machine can't ignore, and it's worth saying now, without the withholding, exactly what that means in light of everything since. Composure isn't a fourth tell to add to the list next to speed and volume and gaze. It's the condition where none of the other three ever get produced, because there was nothing underneath, demanding an exit. Every low-rank tell this film is named is just composure's absence, showing up wherever the alarm found a way out. That's the full shape of the diagnosis. 3 tells and 1 thread running under all of them. Everything covered up to this point has been the proof that the sorting exists, that it runs on a specific signal, that the signal's absence gets punished in one of 3 predictable ways. What comes next isn't more proof. It's the moment all of it resolves into the thing this film has been circling since the opening scan. Go back to the scanner room one more time. A person lies, still. Faces appear above them, ranked, and the instant a higher ranked one shows up, the circuitry fires before any conscious read has happened. That was the opening image of this film, 3 hours ago, offered without explanation. You didn't have the mechanism yet. You do now. Here's the chain, all of it, and none of it needs a new citation, because every link already has one behind it. Dedicated hardware sorts rank on site, separate from the machinery that processes language. Composure is the specific input that hardware rewards, and its absence, showing up as speed or volume or a dropped gaze, gets filed as submission. Instability doesn't calm that hardware down. It revs it, makes a room hunt harder for a stable signal to lock onto. And reactivity, any version of it, hands that hunting system the exact opposite of what it's looking for. Put those 4 pieces in the same room, and here's what happens. Hold composure under real provocation, the kind that would normally produce a leak, and the room sorts you upward. Not because anyone in it sat down and made a decision to respect you. Nobody voted. Nobody deliberated. The amygdala-driven gatekeeper from Kumaran's data read a signal, ran its usual conversion, and started steering behavior around you before a single person in that room could have told you why. That's the ascent. Say the mechanism plainly, because it's the whole engine driving what just happened. You inherit deference. You inherit the benefit of the doubt. And you inherit both of those things before you've earned either one through argument, before you've said the smart thing, before anyone has actually tested whether you're right about anything. The rank arrives first. The reasons, if anyone ever bothers to produce them, get built afterward to justify a verdict the room already reached. Here's the distinction this entire film has been circling since the first section, and it's worth landing without any hedge, now that every piece of it has a study behind it. This is not persuasion. Persuasion is slow. It requires an argument, a listener willing to follow it, a chain of logic that has to survive contact with someone else's skepticism. Classification doesn't wait for any of that. Classification runs on a body, in the room, in real time, and it resolves faster than persuasion could ever hope to. By the time a persuasive case finishes making itself, the room has already filed you somewhere, and that filing has been quietly running the meeting since before your first sentence landed. Sit inside that claim a moment longer, because it's easy to hear it once, and let it slide past as a clever line instead of the operating fact it actually is. Every room you've walked into that seemed to already know where to place you did not know anything. It computed. Fast, wordless, running on the same rank detection hardware Zinc mapped and Kumaran refined. The same circuitry Chiao showed processes status like a number, rather than a feeling. What felt like being read was actually being scored, and the scoring was finished before you had any say in what the final number was going to be. That's the ascent, in full, for the first time stated without anything held back. What's left isn't more proof that it happens. It's what it actually feels like from the inside, in the moment it's happening to you, and why the room hands that verdict down before it even bothers asking your permission. You know the feeling, even if you've never had to name it before now. You walk into a room, say almost nothing, and somewhere in the first few minutes people start orienting toward you anyway. Someone waits for your reaction before finishing their own point. Someone softens a question they'd have asked flatly to anyone else. Nobody announced a decision. It just happened, and it happened before you'd given them a single reason to make it. That feeling isn't luck, and it isn't some vague personal magnetism you either have or don't. It's two pieces of hardware this film already mapped, running at the same time, on the same input. Coumaron's amygdala is doing its job, reading whatever rank signal your composure is putting out and converting it into behavior in the people around you. The hesitation, the deference, the softened question. And zinc circuitry is doing its job alongside it, watching for instability, because most rooms carry some. And instability makes that whole system hungrier for exactly the kind of stable signal a calm person is handing it. Two engines, not one. Run them together, and you get a room quietly reorganizing itself around a person who hasn't yet said anything worth reorganizing around. Here's the asymmetry worth sitting with, because it's easy to skip past as obvious once you've heard it stated plainly. The room doesn't owe you a conscious verdict before it starts treating you a certain way. It doesn't hold a vote, weigh your case, and then decide. It files a rank first, fast, off your body, and only afterward does anyone go looking for reasons to justify a decision that's already been made. Ask someone why they deferred to the calm one in that meeting, and they'll hand you an answer about experience, or tone, or something they read as confidence. That answer isn't a lie. It's just built after the fact, stapled onto a verdict the room's hardware reached, before the reasoning brain got involved at all. Say the line plainly, because it's the cleanest way this film has found to hold the whole idea in one sentence. You get promoted by a machine that never asked your permission. It didn't check whether you wanted the rank. It didn't check whether you'd earned it by any standard. A fair observer would recognize. It ran its calculation on a body holding still under provocation, filed a number, and started acting on that number immediately, in the confidence of the people around you, before they'd have said they felt anything. That's a strange kind of power to hold, because you can't point to the moment you were granted it. There's no ceremony, no explicit acknowledgement, nothing you did on purpose that you could repeat on command and expect the same applause. It's closer to a verdict that arrives quietly and keeps getting reinforced by people who think they're responding to something you said, when what they're actually responding to is something your amygdala's counterpart in their own head already decided about you minutes ago, which raises the only question left standing after all of this. If a room can hand you rank this fast, this automatically, without anyone in it consciously choosing to, then the obvious next move is to ask whether that whole process can be gamed, whether a person could walk in, produce the right stillness on command, and collect the same promotion without any of what's supposed to sit underneath it. That question already has an answer, and this film is about to show you exactly how badly the attempt to shortcut it failed. Someone walks into a single high-stakes meeting having decided, beforehand, to perform calm. They rehearsed it. Flat voice, steady eyes, keeps getting rushed answers. All of it, consciously assembled the way you'd put on a jacket before walking out the door. And it works. For that one meeting, the room reads exactly what they wanted it to read, and they walk out having been filed somewhere near the top of it. Close the part. Here's the part that doesn't survive past that first room. Performing composure takes effort, the same effort. Section 22 already named as its own kind of leak, and effort has a battery life. Hold a rehearsed stillness for an hour, and the strain starts showing in exactly the places it always shows. A jaw that's been locked too long, a pace that's been managed too carefully, a stillness that reads as held rather than resting the longer anyone watches it. One meeting can survive on a performance. A second one, with the same people, starts giving that ranking hardware more data to average, and average data is much harder to fool than a single sample. That's the real problem with treating this as a costume. The system was never asked to grade one moment. It's grading a pattern, the same way Coumaron's amygdala doesn't file a rank once and forget it. It keeps updating, meeting after meeting, and a performance that held for 40 minutes on a Tuesday has to hold again on Thursday, and again the following week, against people who are now watching more closely, because something about the first impression already got logged as worth tracking. This isn't a new lesson, either. It's the same one this film already proved with actual data, back when it walked through what happened to power posing. Clam. An expansive stance held for 2 minutes was supposed to move hormones and change outcomes, and it made it exactly as far as the original small sample, before it collapsed under a bigger one, before the P-curve analysis found nothing of value in it. before its own first author said so publicly. That failure wasn't really about posture. It was about the gap between a surface performed for a moment and a signal that has to hold up over repeated contact. A rehearsed stance couldn't close that gap. Neither can a rehearsed stillness. So here's the standard, stated without softening it. The room's hardware isn't reading a single data point and rendering a verdict on the spot, never to reconsider. It's reading a trend, meeting after meeting, provocation after provocation, and a trend exposes performance in a way one good moment never will. You can fake calm once. You can probably fake it twice, if the stakes are low enough and nobody's paying close attention yet. You cannot fake it across the 10th meeting, the 20th, the one where something genuinely goes wrong and the alarm actually has a reason to fire, which means the real target was never a better performance. It's whatever has to be true in a person's actual nervous system so that there's nothing left to perform in the first place. No gap between the outside and what's happening underneath it, because that gap is exactly what a pattern, watched long enough, always finds. Here's what this film is not going to hand you. No breathing pattern to count out before you walk into a room. No visualization exercise. No instruction to feel your breath moving in and out while you wait for your pulse to settle. If you came here expecting a wellness segment at the end of 3 hours, this isn't going to be it. Say plainly, why? Those techniques belong to a different problem than the one this film has spent 31 sections proving exists. They're coping frames, built to help a person manage a stress response after it's already fired, to sit with discomfort, to bring a racing heart back down once it's already racing. That's a real use for them, somewhere else. It's not this. Everything from zinc circuitry to Kamaran's amygdala to the rushed defense and the raised voice has been building toward one specific claim. A room's ranking hardware is reading whether the alarm fires at all, and how hard, not whether you've gotten good at managing it once it does. A breathing exercise is damage control. This isn't about damage control, so reframe the target precisely, because the distinction matters more than it might sound like it does. The goal was never a person who's mastered hiding the alarm well, holding a practiced stillness over a surge that's still running underneath it. As Section 22 already established, that gap leaks, no matter how well rehearsed the containment is. The actual target is a nervous system that doesn't fire the alarm as hard or as often in the first place. Not in this specific room, under this specific provocation. Not a better mask. A smaller fire to mask. That's a different project than anything a coping technique was built to solve, and it's also a slower one, which is exactly why it wasn't offered earlier, as a shortcut. You don't install a lower baseline the way you install a breathing count. You build it the way anything in a nervous system gets built, through what it's repeatedly exposed to and what it learns, across real exposures, to expect. So here's the angle for what's left. Not a technique to perform in the moment of provocation, because this film has already shown what happens to performances tested against a pattern. Instead, the specific conditions, drawn only from what the research already covered in this film supports, that make the alarm itself run cooler over time, quieter under the same provocation that used to light it up completely. That starts with the same hormonal gatekeeper this film named once already, back when it looked at what actually converts drive into rank, and what blocks that conversion cold. Go back to the finding that already sits at the center of this film's hormone chapter, Mehta and Joseph's, University of Texas at Austin, 2010. Testosterone predicted dominance behavior only when cortisol was low. High cortisol didn't just weaken that effect, it blocked it, sometimes reversed it. That was covered earlier as a diagnosis, a way of explaining why drive alone doesn't convert into rank. Here it gets used differently, not to explain what already happened in a room, but to name the one lever actually worth building. Cortisol is the gatekeeper, not testosterone, not the wanting, not the drive to win the room. All of that can be sitting at full strength in someone and still produce nothing, still get filed downward, if cortisol is high enough to jam the conversion. Which means the entire practical project from here forward isn't about manufacturing more drive. Most people walking into a contested room already have plenty of that. It's about what's sitting on top of the drive, blocking it from ever turning into the composed, rank-claiming behavior. The room is built to reward. Though. So reframe the actual target, because this is where it stops being abstract. The goal isn't a louder display of confidence walking through the door. It's a lower baseline, the cortisol floor a person is already standing on before the provocation even starts. Two people can want the same outcome equally badly. The one whose floor sits lower going in has more room before that gatekeeper slams shut. The one whose floor already sits high is fighting the conversion before the first word gets spoken, no matter how much drive they're carrying underneath it. That's a meaningfully different problem than anything covered so far. Every low-rank tell this film named, the rushed defense, the raised voice, the dropped gaze, was downstream of an alarm that already fired. This is upstream of all of it. Lower the floor, and there's simply less alarm available to leak out through any of those three exits in the first place. It's not damage control after the surge. It's fewer surges reaching threshold to begin with. Voice the caution here plainly, because it earned its place the first time this interaction got named, and it hasn't gotten any more settled since. Decker's and colleagues' 2019 meta-analysis found this testosterone-cortisol interaction small and inconsistent across the studies they pulled together. That doesn't erase Meta and Joseph's finding. It means treat this as the leading operational hypothesis in the room, not a guaranteed mechanism with a warranty attached. Build toward a lower cortisol floor because it's the best supported lever currently on the table, not because anyone can promise you a fixed return on it. Which leaves the actual question worth asking next. A floor isn't lowered by wanting it lower, any more than a rehearsed stillness held up under Section 31 scrutiny. It's lowered by exposure, by what a body has already survived enough times to stop treating as urgent. And that's a pattern this film already has a model for, one it built 2 chapters ago, in a mouse cage, watching what repeated winning actually does to the chemistry underneath it. Picture the same person walking into the same kind of room for the 10th time. Same stakes, roughly. Same species of pushback waiting on the other side of the table. And something's different this time that has nothing to do with the room itself. They're calmer walking in than they were the first time, before anyone said a word, before the meeting even started. That's not confidence, in the way people usually mean the word. It's closer to what Oyegbile and Marler found in those California mice. University of Wisconsin-Madison, 2005. A staged win raised testosterone after the fight and made the next fight easier to win too, independent of whether the mouse was actually stronger this time around. Winning didn't just reflect the mouse's rank, it manufactured more of it, banked forward into the next contest. A room you walk out of without leaking works the same way. Not because you out-argued anyone, not because you scored some visible victory the way a fight has a clear loser at the end of it. Because you exited without the alarm running your face, your voice, your eyes, and that outcome, no visible loss of composure, functions like the staged win in the cage. It's evidence the body files somewhere, evidence that this specific room, this specific flavor of provocation, didn't require the full alarm response last time, which means it needs slightly less of one this time. Name the caveat directly, because it earned its place here, the same way the last one did. This is an extrapolation from an animal model bred and tested under lab conditions, not a citation that measured human hormones across 10 real meetings with the same coworkers. Nobody ran that exact study. Treat the parallel as suggestive, a reasonable read of what repeated non-collapse probably does to a nervous system, not a settled human finding with Oyegbile's name attached to the human version. But suggestive is still worth building on, because it points at something practical that a single meeting never could. Every contested room you leave without a rush defense, without the pitch climbing, without your eyes dropping first, isn't neutral. It's training data, fed into the same machine that's going to rank you the next time you walk back into a room like it. The 10th exposure isn't starting from 0 just because the 10th meeting looks, from the outside, like any other meeting. It's starting from wherever the 9th one left off, which shifts the whole question. It's not only what happens inside one provocation anymore, it's what a body carries out of it, into the next one, and the one after that. And that makes the exact moment of provocation itself worth looking at closer, because that's where all of this either compounds or resets. Section 25 named the rush defense as a tell, a way of spotting where an alarm had already won before the words even finished forming. That was diagnosis. Here it becomes something else. The specific thing worth changing on purpose. The one variable in this entire film that sits close enough to the surface to actually work on. Here's what that gap between provocation and response is actually doing, stripped of everything but the mechanism. It isn't a courtesy. Quote. It isn't good manners, or patience, or someone being polite enough to let a moment breathe before answering. It's visible evidence, readable by anyone watching, that the alarm didn't get to run the body this time. No surge reached the mouth fast enough to shape the first word out of it. The gap is the proof, sitting right there in real time, that whatever fired underneath the surface didn't win control of what came out. Widening that gap on purpose is not the same project as thinking of a smarter answer. That's worth being exact about, because it's the mistake almost everyone makes the first time they try this. A person under provocation doesn't need better material. They need to let the reactive window close before producing any output at all. None. Not even a held breath that reads as an answer being assembled. The gap isn't filled with a better sentence forming quietly behind a straight face. It's empty on purpose. Nothing happening in it is the entire function of it. The moment you start using that space to draft your comeback, you've turned a gap back into a rush, just a slower one. Go back to the two people from section 18, both walking into the same interview, both hearts already pounding before either of them says a word. Neither of them controls whether that spike happens. The body fires the same surge in both of them, on schedule, the same as it always does under real stakes. What separates them isn't the spike, it's what happens in the next few seconds after it. Whether one of them lets that surge dictate the very next thing their mouth does, and whether the other one simply doesn't produce anything until it passes. Same alarm, same room. One person hands control of the next few seconds to their body, the other one doesn't. And that's the entire difference this whole film has been circling since it first put those two hearts side by side. So the target isn't a faster mind. It's a longer pause, held on purpose, empty on purpose, in the exact window where a rush defense used to live. That's the whole adjustment. Nothing added, something withheld, which leaves the rest of the body still in play. A gap in time handles what leaves the mouth first. It says nothing yet about what the mouth sounds like once it finally does open, or what the face is doing while all of this holds still. That's a separate target, and it's the next one worth building. Go back one more time to Hareli, Shamrat, and Hess, University of Haifa, 2009. Not as a diagnosis this time, as a blueprint. Neutral and angry expressions rated more dominant than sadness or shame. That's not a description of what happens to already composed people. That's the spec sheet for what a face is actually supposed to be doing under provocation, if the goal had been defiled at the top of the room instead of the bottom. Say the target precisely, because it's narrower than people assume. Neutral, not angry, and neutral, not perform blank either. There's a difference between a face that isn't reacting, because nothing underneath it is demanding a reaction, and a face that's been locked, rigid, to stop something from showing. Section 22 already covered why the second one fails. The rigid version still leaks, just through tension instead of expression. The actual spec is a face with nothing to contain, not a face containing something well. And the study's own data won't let this get stated as a universal law, so it doesn't get to become one here either. That neutral reads dominant pattern held for men. For women in the same research, anger and happiness read as most dominant, and neutral read as less. Build toward the target that matches the room you're actually walking into, not a single expression applied blindly, regardless of who's wearing it. Here's the part worth being exact about, because it connects everything the last three sections just built. The gap before the response, from section 35, and the neutral face and even voice sitting on top of it, don't get trained the way most people assume. Not in a mirror, not rehearsed alone in a bathroom before a meeting, running the expression until it looks right. They get trained the same way the gap itself got built, through repeated non-collapse under actual provocation, real stakes, a real body producing a real spike, and a face that doesn't hand that spike over to the muscles controlling it. A mirror has no stakes in it. Nothing there is teaching the nervous system anything, because nothing there is threatening it. And here's the last place this film needs to draw the line against power posing, because the contrast is exactly this precise. A pose is a shape struck on purpose, held for 2 minutes, hoping the body catches up to the posture. Section 15 and 16 already showed what happened when that hope got tested against a bigger sample. It didn't hold. What's being built here runs the opposite direction entirely. This isn't a shape you strike and wait on. It's a state you've stopped needing to fake, because the alarm underneath it isn't firing hard enough to need containing in the first place. One is a performance, hoping the biology follows. The other is the biology, with nothing left that needs performing. That's what one room, one meeting, one provocation looks like once it's built. The harder question is what happens when it's the same room, the same people, meeting after meeting, watching whether that neutral signal was a lucky Tuesday or something they can now expect every time they sit across from you. Same group. Same conference room, more or less, week after week for a couple months. Same person sitting roughly where they always sit. Nothing about the seating chart changes, and nothing dramatic happens in any single one of these meetings. But something has shifted in how the room orients around that one chair, and nobody in it could tell you the exact meeting where it happened. Here's why not. Rank doesn't get recomputed from 0 every time you walk through a door. That would mean a fresh verdict, each meeting, wiped clean, judged only on what happened in that hour. That's not how the hardware works. It accumulates. Every prior exposure is still sitting in there, still weighing on the next read, which means composure held consistently across 5 meetings doesn't just repeat the same filing 5 times. It compounds it, each instance adding weight to a rank that was already leaning upward before this week's meeting even started. Qumran's amygdala finding matters again here, and it matters differently than it did the first time it came up. That signal doesn't fire once and shut off. It keeps tracking, keeps updating, keeps shaping the decisions people make around a given person over time, which means consistent composure isn't just failing to give the alarm a foothold in any one room. It's feeding that same tracking signal identical input, meeting after meeting, until the system isn't guessing anymore. It's confirming something it already suspected. State the compounding plainly, because it's the part most people miss when they think about this only meeting to meeting. The 10th calm response in that room outranks the first one, not because the 10th one was harder, or smarter, or more impressive on its own terms. Because the room isn't grading each meeting in isolation, the way a single test gets graded and forgotten. It's grading a trend, and a trend has memory. The first calm response is one data point, easy to write off as a fluke, a good day, nothing that overrides whatever else the room thought it knew. The 10th is a pattern nobody in that room can explain away anymore, even if they wanted to. That's the part worth sitting with before moving anywhere else. This isn't a system you win once and then coast on. It's not persuading anyone through a single strong performance and banking that reputation forever. It's continuous, live, still running the same calculation on the 11th meeting and the 12th, quietly stacking evidence in one direction, the same way it would quietly stack it in the other, if the pattern ever broke. Rank, once it starts compounding, doesn't need a new argument to keep climbing. It just needs the pattern to keep holding, which raises a different kind of discipline than anything covered so far, because compounding rank creates its own temptation. The moment composure clearly wins a room, something in most people wants to show it, and showing it turns out to cost exactly the thing that made it work. The meeting ends. Composure held the entire way through, and it worked. You can feel it work, the room settling in a direction that favors you, the pushback that started strong an hour ago now. Quiet, deferential, done. And right there, in that exact half second, something in you wants to let it show. A breath released too visibly, a shift in posture that says relief, a look that says you weren't sure that was going to land, and now you are. Don't. Here's why that urge costs you more than it feels like it should. A visible display of triumph, even a small one, tells the room something you don't want it knowing, that the outcome was in doubt, that the calm wasn't free. That it took something out of you to hold, and now that the pressure's off, you're showing the bill, which means the relief doesn't just mark a good outcome. It reaches backward and reframes the whole performance that came before it, turning what looked like a resting state into what it actually was, an effort held under strain, finally set down. Every leak this film has named so far happened during the provocation. This one happens after it's already over, and it's just as expensive. So, the correct response to a room clearly won is no visible response at all. Not a smaller version of triumph, not a contained smile instead of an open one. Nothing that marks the moment is different from the 50 ordinary moments that came before it in that same meeting. The entire value of the signal you spent the last hour producing was that it looked like it cost you nothing. Confirm that story. Don't undercut it in the last 30 seconds by finally admitting there was a story to tell. Here's the principle, stated the way this film has tried to state everything. Plainly, without dressing it up. The win stays quiet because the composure driving it was never a performance built for that specific moment in the first place. It's not a mask you held until the danger passed and then set down with visible relief. It's the resting state, the same one that was running before the meeting started and the same one that keeps running after it ends, whether the room went your way or not. Nothing about winning changes what the face is doing, because nothing about losing would have changed it either. That consistency, and not the specific outcome of any one meeting, is the entire thing the room has actually been reading all along. That's the discipline. Not showing joy, not showing relief, not showing anything that admits the calm was ever in question. Just the same face, walking out, that walked in. Widen the lens now. All the way out. Not one meeting, not one room, not one difficult month, with a difficult group of people. Picture the whole span of it. Years, dozens of rooms, different buildings, different faces sitting across the table, and one thing staying constant across all of it. The same person, consistently filed near the top, and nobody in any of those rooms ever quite able to explain why in a sentence that holds up. They'll reach for words, presence, gravitas, something they were born with. None of it is true, and this film spent 3 hours proving exactly why none of it is true. What those rooms were actually responding to was never a personality trait floating above the evidence. It was a body that declined, meeting after meeting, to hand its ranking hardware, anything to file a submission. That's the whole explanation. It just never announces itself as one, because the machine doing the filing was never built to explain itself to the person it's filing. Here's the cost nobody in that room ever gets told about, because there's no mechanism for telling them. Every person who took the bait, who let the pitch climb, who answered half a second too fast, who dropped their eyes first, paid for it in rank, quietly, without a single conversation ever naming what happened. Nobody sat them down afterward and said your voice gave you away in that meeting. The system doesn't issue receipts. It just files, silently, and lets the filing shape what happens to that person in every room after it, while they walk away with no idea that's what cost them. That's the final shape of the claim this film has been building since the scanner room in the opening minutes. The room made its decision before anyone spoke. It is still making that decision, right now, in whatever room you're picturing as you hear this, and it will keep making it in every room you walk into for the rest of your life, whether you understand the mechanism or not. Understanding it doesn't turn it off. It never turns off. It just tells you which signal it's been reading the entire time. Go back to the scanner room one last time. A person lying still, a face on the screen above them, ranked. The circuitry fires before conscious thought arrives, the same as it did in the first minute of this film, the same as it does in every room, right now, whether anyone in it is watching for it or not. The machine never stopped running. Rank filed, decision made, before a single word gets spoken. Subscribe for the next mechanism the room is already using on you, without asking your permission.